May 8, 1945, 11:47 a.m., Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter stood frozen in the doorway of a Piggly Wiggly supermarket, his hands trembling. Behind him, 17 other German prisoners of war waited in formation, still wearing their Afrika Korps uniforms with the large PW stenciled in white paint across their backs. The American MP sergeant had told them they'd be making a routine supply run. What Klaus saw through that glass door made his throat tighten and his eyes burn. Rows. Endless rows of food. Canned goods stacked floor to ceiling. Fresh meat behind glass counters. Pyramids of oranges and apples. Chocolate bars in boxes of 50. White bread wrapped in wax paper. Dozens of loaves deep. In the prison camps back in North Africa, in the bombed-out cities of Germany his family wrote from, people were eating grass soup and potato peels. His younger sister Greta had written 3 weeks ago about trading her winter coat for 2 pounds of flour on the black market. Before we continue with Klaus's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten perspectives alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and humanity from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, where Klaus Richter was about to have everything he believed shattered. Klaus Richter was 23 years old, son of a postal clerk from Heidelberg. He joined the Wehrmacht in 1941, believing what Joseph Goebbels had broadcast into every German home for years. America was a broken nation, a country destroyed by economic collapse, racial division, and corrupt democracy. Jews controlled the banks. The people starved while capitalists hoarded wealth. American soldiers, Goebbels said, were cowards who'd never faced real combat. Poorly trained and equipped with inferior weapons. Klaus had believed it all, every word. He'd been captured in Tunisia in May 1943, part of the 21st Panzer Division's collapse at Cap Bon. The transport ship to America took 19 days. He'd expected to arrive at a country on its knees. Instead, the first thing he saw from the deck as they approached Norfolk, Virginia, was the shipyard. 47 vessels under construction simultaneously. Cranes moving like a mechanical forest, sparks from welding torches lighting up the night shift. The harbor was so crowded with military and merchant ships, they had to wait 3 hours for a berth. That was the first crack in the propaganda wall. Between May 1943 and May 1945, approximately 371, Zeus German prisoners of war were held in camps across the continental United States. They were dispersed to over 500 camps in 44 states. The Geneva Convention required they be fed the same rations as American troops. For most German POWs, this meant they ate better as prisoners in America than they ever had as soldiers in the Wehrmacht. But eating military rations in a prison camp cafeteria was one thing. What Klaus saw through that supermarket door was something else entirely. Camp Shelby had been Klaus's home since August 1943. It wasn't what he'd expected from a prison camp. The barracks had heating, running water, electric lights. The camp library had over 2,000 books, including German classics. Prisoners could take correspondence courses from Mississippi Southern College. They played soccer on weekends. They were paid 80 cents a day in camp scrip for labor details, which they could spend at the camp canteen on cigarettes, toiletries, and candy bars. The cognitive dissonance was profound. Klaus had spent 2 years fighting for a regime that told him Americans were weak, degenerate, barely functional as a society. Yet here he was, a prisoner living better than he had as a free man in Germany in 1939. He'd tried to explain this in letters home, but the censors cut most of it out. His mother wrote back saying food rations in Heidelberg had been reduced again. 250 grams of bread per day, meat once a week if you were lucky. The bombing had destroyed the rail lines, so fresh vegetables rarely arrived. People were keeping rabbits in their apartments, slaughtering them in bathtubs. Klaus's closest friend in the camp was Unteroffizier Werner Hoffmann, a tank commander from Hamburg. Werner was 26, engaged to a girl named Ilse, who worked in a munitions factory. They'd planned to marry in the summer of 1942, but Werner's unit had been deployed to North Africa before they could. He carried her photograph everywhere, wrapped in wax paper to protect it from sweat and water. Werner and Klaus had been captured in the same battle, spent the same 19 days on the transport ship, been assigned to the same barracks at Camp Shelby. They worked the same labor details, cutting timber in the Mississippi pine forests for the war effort. At night, they'd sit on the barracks steps and talk about what they'd do when they went home. Werner wanted to open a motorcycle repair shop. Klaus wanted to finish his engineering degree, maybe design bridges. When this is over, Werner would say, and we tell people what America is really like, they won't believe us. Werner had been right about that. The problem wasn't just that the propaganda had been lies. The problem was that the lies had been so complete, so systematic, that discovering the truth felt like madness. Klaus would lie awake at night doing calculations in his head. The camp held 200 German prisoners. They were fed 3 meals a day, adequate calories, meat several times a week. The camp was just one of more than 500. That meant hundreds of thousands of enemy prisoners eating well, while German civilians starved. And this was just the prisoners. American troops ate even better. The American guards at Camp Shelby complained about the food. Complained. Klaus had heard one MP grumble that the powdered eggs at breakfast were barely edible. Klaus had wanted to grab the man's collar and scream, "Powdered eggs." The American military had so much food they could waste resources turning eggs into powder for convenience. The mathematics of American production capacity were incomprehensible. The numbers didn't make sense. Goebbels had said American industry was inefficient, crippled by labor strikes and Jewish corruption. Yet Klaus had watched American trucks roll through Camp Shelby in convoys of 30-40 vehicles at a time, all identical, all new. The guards said Ford was producing a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes at Willow Run. Klaus had been trained as an engineer. He knew what that meant. 1 4-engine heavy bomber every hour around the clock. Germany's entire bomber production in 1944 had been fewer than 2 Ozozetron aircraft. Total, all types. The second crack in the propaganda wall had been the black soldiers. Goebbels had spent years depicting African Americans as subhuman, oppressed, on the verge of revolt. Yet Klaus saw black MPs guarding the camp, carrying the same weapons as white soldiers, wearing the same uniforms. He saw black officers giving orders that white enlisted men followed. The black quartermaster sergeant who processed Klaus's intake papers had been polite, efficient, bored. The situation wasn't perfect. Klaus noticed the segregation, the separate facilities, the tension, but it wasn't the race war Goebbels had promised. It was just complicated, messy, human. That was what propaganda couldn't survive: complexity. On April 19, 1945, Werner received a letter from Germany. It had taken 7 weeks to arrive, routed through Switzerland and the International Red Cross. The envelope was dirty, torn at the corners, stamped with a dozen different postal marks. Werner opened it during the evening mail call, sitting on his bunk. Klaus was across the barracks, playing chess with another prisoner named Franz. He looked up when Werner made a sound. Not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. Just a sharp intake of breath. Ilse was dead, killed in the RAF bombing of Hamburg on March 3rd. She'd been working the night shift at the munitions factory when the bombs hit. The factory had taken a direct hit. The letter was from Ilse's mother, 4 handwritten pages describing the funeral, the shortage of coffins, the way the churches couldn't keep up with all the burial services. Ilse's mother had written, "She waited for you. She never gave up hope. I'm sorry, Werner. I'm so sorry." Werner sat on his bunk holding the letter for 3 hours. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, the photograph of Ilse in his other hand, staring at nothing. Klaus didn't know what to say. What could you say? They were prisoners in a comfortable camp, eating regular meals, playing soccer on Sundays, while the women they loved died in bombing raids and starved in ruined cities. The guilt was crushing. That night Werner finally spoke. "They lied to us," he said quietly. About everything. Klaus nodded in the darkness. The Americans aren't weak, Werner continued. They're not starving, they're not on the verge of collapse, they have so much. He trailed off. And we're losing, because we believe the lies. The question Klaus couldn't escape. If they'd lied about America's weakness, what else had they lied about? Between April 1945 and May 1945, the collapse of Nazi Germany accelerated. Prisoners at Camp Shelby received news through carefully monitored radio broadcasts and newspapers. Each day brought fresh horror, concentration camps liberated, photographs of stacked corpses, testimony from survivors. The guards watched the German prisoners carefully, expecting denial or violence. What they got instead was silence. Stunned, hollow silence. Klaus had known, abstractly, that bad things were happening to Jews. You couldn't live in Germany and not know. There were the laws, the deportations, the whispered rumors. But Goebbels had said they were being resettled, put to work in the East. Labor camps, not death camps. Unpleasant necessity, not systematic extermination. The photographs from Bergen-Belsen and Dachau and Buchenwald told a different story. Klaus threw up the first time he saw the images. So did Werner. So did most of the men in their barracks. The American guards made them look anyway, pinned the photographs to the barracks walls, forced them to confront what had been done in their name. We didn't know, Klaus said to one of the MPs, a staff sergeant from Iowa named Morrison. Morrison looked at him for a long moment. Maybe, he finally said, but you should have asked more questions. The guilt metastasized. It wasn't just about losing the war anymore. It was about what they'd been part of, what they'd enabled through action or inaction. Klaus had joined the Wehrmacht believing he was defending Germany. Now he didn't know what he'd been defending. Werner stopped carrying Ilse's photograph. He said he couldn't look at her face anymore, not after seeing what had been done at the camps. The cognitive dissonance reached breaking point. Everything they'd been told was a lie. Everything they'd fought for was poison. And here they were, prisoners in a country they'd been taught to despise, living better than they ever had as free men. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. At Camp Shelby, the announcement came over the loudspeakers at 9:00 a.m. The German prisoners were assembled in the main yard. An American colonel gave a short speech. The war was over. Prisoners would be repatriated when transportation allowed, probably within 12 to 18 months. In the meantime, the camp would continue operating under current conditions. Klaus felt nothing. Relief, maybe. Exhaustion, definitely. But not joy, not sorrow. Just a vast, empty numbness. That afternoon, the camp commander authorized a special privilege for prisoners with good behavior records, escorted trips to local stores to purchase items for personal use. It was partly humanitarian, let them buy gifts to send home eventually, and partly practical. The local economy had become dependent on prisoner labor and prisoner wages. Hattiesburg businesses wanted the German POWs to keep spending their camp scrip, which was how Klaus Richter found himself standing in front of a Piggly Wiggly supermarket on May 8, 1945, looking at more food than he'd seen in 6 years. The MP sergeant, a man named Wilson from Tennessee, had explained the rules during the truck ride into town. Prisoners would enter in groups of 6, supervised by 2 guards. They could purchase up to $10 worth of goods using their camp scrip, which the store would accept at face value. No alcohol, no tobacco beyond personal use limits, no trouble. Klaus was in the 3rd group. Werner was beside him, along with Franz, a quiet man named Otto, and 2 younger prisoners named Dieter and Hans. They filed off the truck and stood on the sidewalk outside the supermarket, staring through the glass windows. Sergeant Wilson noticed their hesitation. "What's the hold-up?" he asked, not unkindly. "Is this—" Klaus's English was decent after 2 years in the camp, but he struggled for words. "Is this a special store? For military?" Wilson laughed. "Hell no, this is just a regular grocery store. Little one, actually. Come on." He held the door open. Klaus stepped inside and stopped breathing. The smell hit first. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, floor wax, something sweet from the bakery section. Then the visual. Aisle after aisle of shelves packed with goods, canned vegetables in towers 6 feet high, boxes of cereal, at least 20 different brands, flour, sugar, coffee, fresh meat behind refrigerated glass counters, beef, pork, chicken, laid out in abundance, a produce section with oranges, apples, potatoes, carrots, lettuce, tomatoes. Klaus did the mathematics automatically. The meat counter alone held more protein than his entire company had eaten in a week during the Africa campaign. One section of canned goods represented more preserved food than a German family could acquire in 6 months of ration cards. Behind him, Werner whispered, "Mein Gott." An American woman pushed a shopping cart past them, a child sitting in the cart's basket. The cart was half full: bread, milk, eggs, a package of pork chops, canned corn, fresh apples, a box of something called Wheaties, a bag of sugar. She glanced at the German prisoners with mild curiosity, then continued shopping. That was what broke Klaus. Not hostility, not fear, just mild curiosity. To her, this was normal, ordinary, a routine Thursday morning at the grocery store. "They lied to us," Werner said again, louder this time. "They lied about everything." Klaus walked down the first aisle slowly, reading labels. Campbell's soup, 12 varieties. Heinz ketchup stacked 4 deep. Del Monte canned peaches, pears, fruit cocktail. He picked up a can of peaches, turned it over in his hands. The label showed a painting of fresh peaches in a bowl. The price was 23 cents. He'd been paid 80 cents a day for cutting timber. One day's work could buy 3 cans of peaches, luxury goods, dessert. In Germany, peaches were a memory. Something you'd eaten before the war if you were lucky. Otto was standing in front of the meat counter, tears running down his face. He didn't try to hide them. The butcher, a heavy man in a white apron, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Dieter was in the bread section counting loaves. Klaus walked over. 47, Dieter said. "Just white bread. There's wheat bread too, and something called rye. 47 loaves of white bread in one small store on a Thursday." Hans had found the candy section, chocolate bars by the dozen. Hershey's, Baby Ruth, Butterfinger, 3 Musketeers. He picked up a Hershey's bar, stared at it, put it back. Picked up another one, put it back. His hands were shaking. Franz wasn't looking at the food. He was watching the American shoppers. A man in work clothes selecting canned beans without hurry. 2 women comparing prices on coffee, discussing which brand their husbands preferred. An elderly man buying flour and sugar, complaining mildly about the price to the clerk. "Look at them," Franz said to Klaus. "They're bored. Shopping for food bores them." It was true. The Americans moved through the store with casual disinterest, picking up items, putting them back, comparing prices not because food was scarce, but because they wanted the best value. The abundance was so complete, so normal to them, that it had become mundane. Klaus remembered standing in line for 2 hours in Heidelberg in 1942, waiting for the bakery to open, hoping they wouldn't run out of bread before he reached the front. He remembered his mother crying when she'd managed to acquire a 1/4 pound of real butter on the black market, trading a silver bracelet that had belonged to Klaus's grandmother. He remembered the taste of ersatz coffee, made from roasted acorns, and how they'd all pretended it was fine. Sergeant Wilson walked up to the group. "Are you fellas okay? You can actually buy things, you know, that's the point." Werner turned to face him. "Sergeant, does everyone in America shop like this, or only rich people?" Wilson shrugged. "Pretty much everyone. I mean, there's rationing for some things. Sugar, meat, coffee during the war. But yeah, most folks can buy groceries like this. Why?" "We were told America was starving," Werner said flatly. "We were told your economy had collapsed, that people were rioting for food in the streets." Wilson's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "Jesus," he said softly. "You guys really believed that?" "We had no reason not to," Klaus said. "We'd never been here. All we knew was what we were told." The shopping trip lasted 45 minutes. Klaus bought a can of peaches, a chocolate bar, and a loaf of bread, not because he needed them, the camp provided adequate food, but because he needed to touch them, to carry them, to prove they were real. Werner bought nothing. He just walked up and down the aisles staring. On the truck ride back to Camp Shelby, nobody spoke. They sat in silence, holding their small purchases, processing what they'd seen. That evening, Klaus wrote a letter to his mother. The censors would cut most of it, he knew, but he had to try. He described the supermarket, the abundance, the casual American shoppers. He tried to explain what it meant, that they'd been lied to systematically and completely, that the war had been lost not because of betrayal or bad luck, but because they'd been fighting an enemy whose productive capacity was beyond anything Goebbels could admit existed. "We never had a chance," he wrote. "Not because American soldiers were better, though many were, but because America could afford to waste. They have so much they can be inefficient and still win. They fed us better as prisoners than our own government fed us as soldiers. What kind of country does that? What kind of power?" He mailed the letter knowing his mother would never read most of it, but he had to write it anyway, had to bear witness to the truth, even if only for himself. The realization spread through Camp Shelby's German prisoner population like a slow-burning fire. Men who'd been taken on shopping trips told those who hadn't. Details accumulated. Department stores with racks of clothing, hardware stores fully stocked, movie theaters showing films to anyone who could afford a ticket. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, wasn't even a major city, just a modest southern town, yet it had resources that would have seemed fantastical in Berlin or Munich. The American guards noticed the change in the prisoners, less defiance, less sullen nationalism. The hardcore Nazis, the ones who still believed in the Reich's ultimate victory, became isolated, viewed as delusional by their fellow prisoners. Most men just wanted to go home, rebuild, forget. But forgetting was impossible after seeing that supermarket. Klaus spent the next 15 months at Camp Shelby. The repatriation process was slow, complicated by logistics and politics. Germany was in ruins, divided into occupation zones, struggling with basic infrastructure. The Allies weren't in a hurry to send hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers back to a country they were still trying to stabilize. During those months, Klaus took more supervised trips into Hattiesburg. Each one reinforced the lesson. He saw houses with electric refrigerators, multiple automobiles parked on ordinary residential streets, children who looked healthy and well-fed. He watched Americans complain about minor inconveniences and wanted to laugh or cry or both. Werner stopped talking much. The silence that had started with Ilse's death deepened after the supermarket trip. He worked his labor details, ate his meals, slept. But something inside him had broken. Not violently. There was no dramatic collapse, just a quiet dissolution of whatever had held him together. In June 1946, Werner was part of a repatriation group sent back to Germany via military transport. Klaus stood at the fence and watched the trucks pull away. Werner didn't wave. Klaus never heard from him again. After the war, Klaus tried to track him down through Red Cross channels. No record. Werner Hoffmann had simply disappeared into the chaos of post-war Germany, another ghost among millions. Klaus's own repatriation came in August 1946. The transport ship reversed his journey of 3 years earlier, Mississippi to Norfolk to across the Atlantic to Bremerhaven. The voyage took 12 days. Germany, when he finally saw it from the deck, looked like photographs of the moon, cratered, blasted dead. Heidelberg had survived better than many cities, spared the worst of the strategic bombing, but the war's impact was everywhere. Ruins, rubble, thin people moving through streets with hollow eyes. Klaus's mother had aged 20 years. His sister Greta was 15 now, helping sort rubble for reconstruction crews. His father's postal station was operational but understaffed. The building's windows still blown out from a 1945 bombing raid. The food situation was catastrophic. Daily rations in the American occupation zone. 550 calories per person, barely above starvation level. The black market consumed everything. A single egg cost 50 Reichsmarks. People traded family heirlooms for potatoes. Klaus's first week home, he lost 8 pounds. He didn't talk about America. Who would believe him? Even if they believed, what good would it do? Germany had lost. They were occupied, divided, broken. Knowing that America had supermarkets full of food wouldn't change anything except make the hunger worse. Klaus found work as a day laborer clearing rubble. It was the only job available for returning Wehrmacht soldiers. The work was brutal. The pay minimal. But it was something. He saved every pfennig, ate as little as possible, gave most of his rations to his mother and Greta. At night he'd lie awake remembering the Piggly Wiggly supermarket, the smell of fresh bread, the abundance of canned goods, the American woman with her casual shopping cart, her bored expression. The memory became surreal, dreamlike. Had it really been real? Had he really stood in a store with 47 loaves of bread while German children starved? In 1948, the Marshall Plan began. American aid flooded into Western Germany, food, machinery, capital investment. The occupation authorities established new currency, new economic policies. Slowly, impossibly, Germany began to recover. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, started taking shape. Klaus watched it happen with complicated feelings. Gratitude, certainly. Relief. But also a deep, abiding shame. America was rebuilding the country that had tried to destroy it. The same industrial capacity that had buried the Wehrmacht under an avalanche of tanks and planes was now being used to feed German children and reconstruct German cities. They lied to us, Werner had said, about everything. Klaus found work as a junior engineer in 1950, helping design bridges for the new highway system. West Germany was transforming, becoming modern, prosperous. By 1955, you could walk into stores in Heidelberg and see abundance. Not American abundance, not yet, but real selection. Food, clothing, consumer goods. The hunger years were ending. Klaus married in 1952, a woman named Anna who worked as a teacher. They had 2 children, a son in 1953, a daughter in 1956. He never told them about being a prisoner of war. Never described Camp Shelby or the Piggly Wiggly supermarket or the cognitive dissonance of living better as an enemy prisoner than as a German soldier. What would be the point? The past was past. Germany was becoming something new. The children needed to look forward, not back. But Klaus never forgot. Every time he walked into a grocery store, even in the prosperous 1960s, even in the abundant 1970s, he remembered standing in that doorway in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, on May 8, 1945, remembered the smell of fresh bread, remembered the American woman's bored expression, remembered Werner's tears in front of the meat counter. They lied to us. Klaus Richter died in 1994 at age 72 of heart failure. The obituary in the Heidelberg newspaper mentioned his career as a civil engineer, his work on the A5 Autobahn bridges, his surviving children and grandchildren. It said nothing about his service in the Wehrmacht or his time as a prisoner of war in Mississippi. His son, clearing out the family home after Klaus's death, found a box in the attic. Inside, Klaus's old Afrika Korps uniform with the PW stencil, a can of Del Monte peaches, unopened, expired 1946, a photograph of Camp Shelby, and a letter that had never been sent. The letter described a supermarket in Mississippi, full of food, where American families shopped with casual indifference while the world starved. The son read the letter 3 times, trying to understand. His father had never mentioned any of this, never spoken about the war beyond vague references to difficult times. The letter felt like it had been written by a stranger, but at the bottom, in his father's handwriting, a final note. We were lied to about everything, about America, about the war, about what we were fighting for. The hardest truth, discovering your enemy, was never what you were told. They beat us with kindness, fed us better than our own government, showed us what we could have been if we'd chosen differently. That's what I can't forgive, not America, but our own leaders who lied, and ourselves for believing. In 2003, a historian researching German POW experiences in the American South contacted Klaus Richter's family. She was writing a book about cultural shock among Axis prisoners, confronting American abundance. She'd found references to Klaus in Camp Shelby records and wanted to interview surviving family members. Klaus's son shared the letter and the photograph. The historian included Klaus's story in her book, published in 2005. One chapter focused specifically on the psychological impact of that first supermarket visit, the moment when propaganda met reality and shattered. The book sold modestly, mostly to academic audiences. A few veterans read it. Some German families whose fathers and grandfathers had been POWs in America recognized the stories. The truth, 60 years delayed, finally entered the historical record. There's a small museum in Hattiesburg now, in the Camp Shelby Joint Forces Training Center. One exhibit covers the German POW camp that operated there from 1943 to 1946. There's a photograph of prisoners working in the pine forests, another of the barracks, a display of camp scrip and handmade crafts. And there's a placard that quotes Klaus Richter's letter. The section about the Piggly Wiggly supermarket, about standing in the doorway on May 8, 1945, about watching American families shop with casual indifference while everything he'd believed collapsed around him. The placard ends with a question: how many other lies did we believe? How many still remain? Fewer than 100 visitors see it each year. Most are military personnel training at Camp Shelby, stopping by the museum on a slow afternoon. They read the placard, look at the photograph of young German prisoners in their Afrika Korps uniforms, and move on. The story remains obscure, forgotten by everyone except a handful of historians and the descendants of men like Klaus Richter. Men who learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest defeat isn't losing the war, but discovering everything you'd been told was a lie. If this story moved you, if it made you think about propaganda, truth, and the power of simply seeing reality, hit that like button. These perspectives from ordinary soldiers, the moments when belief systems collapsed, need to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another forgotten story from World War II. And tell us in the comments, did your family have any stories from the war from either side? Were your grandparents part of that generation? How do we balance historical memory with moving forward? We want to hear from you. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. These men, Klaus Werner, all of them, lived through something most of us can't imagine. The least we can do is remember.